"You've always been a disappointment, Scarlett. A total disgrace to the Miller name." My father said it without even blinking. His arm draped around the waist of that girl, Tiffany, who looked like she barely belonged out of a high school yearbook. We were standing in the probate court in Annapolis, in that old brick building that smells like floor wax and stale coffee. My mother hadn't even been gone 6 months. She spent her final 3 years fading away in that house in Eastport, fighting through every agonizing stage of her illness, while this man I called my father was already out spending her savings on fancy dinners and jewelry from the shops at Town Center for a 21-year-old. Now, he was standing in front of the judge, trying to sell my mother's family home, just to fund his new wife's shopping sprees at the high-end boutiques. He told the judge I was unstable, a drifter, who ran off to sea because I couldn't hold down a real job on dry land. He looked at my worn leather boots and my messy hair, and thought I was a loser, a low-level deckhand with no money to my name. He called me a dishonor in front of the neighbors who had shown up just to gossip. What he didn't know, and what he was about to find out the hard way, was that my disappearances weren't because I lacked a plan. Every time I left, it was to take command of operations he can't even wrap his head around. He thought he was humiliating a struggling daughter, but he was standing across from a Navy commander with the federal authority to freeze every cent he had. And when my legal counsel walked into that room, not some local strip mall lawyer, but a JAG officer in full-dress whites with a federal injunction from the Pentagon, my father's little smirk completely vanished. There's nothing that burns quite like watching a father betray your mother's memory, just to pay for the lifestyle of someone who didn't build a thing. He thought my silence during my years of service meant I didn't have a voice. He thought he could sell the roof over my head and toss me aside like trash. If you've ever had to stand up to a predator inside your own family, or if you've watched someone try to erase your value while you were busy doing the real work, this story is for you. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to tell you, block by block, exactly how I used the law and my rank to put that man in his place and protect what belonged to my mother. The air in the courtroom was thick, the kind of heavy heat that sticks to the back of your neck even when the fans are spinning. I sat on the hard wooden bench, feeling the grain of the oak through my jeans. Across the aisle, my father was whispering something into Tiffany's ear, making her giggle. It was nauseating. This was the same man who used to hold my mother's hand during her chemo sessions at Anne Arundel Medical Center. Or at least he pretended to until the sun went down. He was wearing a navy blazer that probably cost more than my first 2 cars combined, looking every bit the successful Annapolis businessman. To him, I was just a ghost, the daughter who ran away to sea every time life got hard. He didn't see the woman who had spent the last decade navigating the most dangerous waters on the planet. He just saw a girl who wouldn't get out of the way of his payday. When my father took the stand, he didn't even look at me. He played the part of the grieving widower perfectly, dabbing at his eyes with a silk handkerchief. "Your Honor," he started, his voice cracking just enough to sound convincing. "My late wife would have wanted me to move on. This house, it's too much for Scarlett. She has no steady income, no permanent address. She's spent her life bouncing from one boat to another like a common deckhand. She can't maintain a property of this value." He looked around the room, making sure the neighbors from Bay Ridge saw his performance. He was painting a picture of a failed daughter, someone who had abandoned her family for a life of aimless travel. I watched his hands, the same hands that had signed the papers to put my mother in hospice, and I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. He had no idea what kind of storm was about to hit him. Mrs. Gable, the lady who lived next door to us for 20 years, was sitting in the front row, nodding along to every word my father said. I remember her bringing over casseroles from Giant when Mom first got sick, acting like she was our biggest supporter. Now, she was looking at me with that patronizing pity that makes your skin crawl. My father had convinced the whole neighborhood that I was the one who had disappeared when things got tough, that I had left him to handle my mother's illness alone. He didn't mention the hundreds of thousands of dollars I had wired home from overseas to cover the experimental treatments the insurance wouldn't touch. He didn't mention the satellite calls I made at 3 a.m. from the middle of the Atlantic, just to hear my mother's breathing. In his story, I was the villain, and the house in Eastport was his reward for staying behind. The judge, an older man with glasses perched on the tip of his nose, looked over at me. "Ms. Miller, your father claims you lack the financial stability to take over the estate. He's filed a motion to sell the property immediately to settle outstanding debts he claims were incurred during your mother's care." I looked at the debts on the paper. Most of them were for luxury car leases and a down payment on a condo in Miami that Natalie, Tiffany, had picked out. My father smirked at me, a look that said, "I win." He thought he had me backed into a corner because I didn't have a flashy lawyer or a high-rise office. But I wasn't just Scarlett Miller, the girl from the neighborhood, anymore. I stood up, smoothed out my shirt, and looked the judge in the eye. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I have a representative arriving who can clarify my financial status and my professional standing." Just as the judge started to reach for his gavel, the heavy oak doors at the back of the room swung open. The sound echoed off the high ceilings like a gunshot. Everyone turned. Walking down the center aisle was a man in full navy dress whites, his medals clicking softly with every disciplined step. It was Lieutenant Commander Vance, a senior JAG officer I'd served with in the Pacific. He wasn't some local lawyer looking for a quick settlement. He was the personification of federal authority. My father's smirk didn't just fade, it froze. He looked at Vance, then at me, then back at Vance. You could hear the whispers starting in the gallery. Tiffany leaned back, her eyes wide, looking like she wanted to disappear into the upholstery of her chair. Vance didn't look left or right. He walked straight to the front, stood beside me, and placed a thick, leather-bound briefcase on the table. The air in the room suddenly felt a lot colder for my father. "Your Honor," Vance's voice was like iron. "I am Lieutenant Commander Marcus Vance, representing the legal interests of Commander Scarlett Miller." The judge blinked, leaning forward so far his glasses almost fell off. "Commander?" he repeated, looking at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. Vance didn't miss a beat. "Yes, Your Honor. Commander Miller has been on active duty for over a decade. Due to the sensitive nature of her assignments with the Atlantic Fleet, her records and specific whereabouts have been restricted under federal privacy laws." He pulled a stack of documents from his briefcase, papers with the official seal of the Department of Defense. "We are here to contest the sale of the Eastport property and to present evidence regarding the true source of the funds used for the late Mrs. Miller's medical expenses." My father's hand started to shake as he reached for a glass of water, spilling half of it on his blazer. Vance laid out the records on the judge's bench. "While Mr. Miller has claimed these debts were for health care, our records show that every major medical bill from Johns Hopkins and the private nursing staff was paid in full by Commander Miller via a secure military allotment." He turned slightly, looking my father dead in the eye. "Furthermore, we have bank statements showing that the debts Mr. Miller is referring to are actually personal loans taken out to purchase a 2026 luxury convertible and a lease on a penthouse in Ocean City. These were not expenses for his dying wife. They were for his own personal enrichment. While his daughter was serving her country, a collective gasp went up from the neighbors in the back. Even Mrs. Gable looked horrified, pulling her cardigan tight around her chest. My father looked like a cornered animal, his face turning a blotchy, panicked red. The judge looked through the papers, his expression hardening with every page he turned. He looked at my father with pure disgust. I stepped forward, not as a grieving daughter, but as an officer. "I stayed quiet because I had a job to do," I said, my voice steady and low. "I trusted you to take care of Mom while I was deployed. And instead, you treated her illness like a business opportunity." I looked at Tiffany, who was now frantically checking her phone, probably looking for an exit strategy. "You told this court I was a disgrace. But the only disgrace in this room is a man who forgets 30 years of marriage the second things get difficult." My father tried to speak, to blurt out some excuse about needing to live his life. But the judge held up a hand. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being judged. The judge took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, staring at the evidence like it was something he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. He looked at my father, who was now sweating through his expensive silk shirt. "Mr. Miller," the judge began, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "This court does not take kindly to being used as a tool for fraud. You sat there and swore under oath that your daughter was an aimless drifter while she was commanding naval vessels and paying your wife's hospital bills from halfway across the globe." My father tried to stand up, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Your Honor, I can explain the car. It was a gift for—" The judge slammed his gavel down so hard a glass of water on the court reporter's desk rattled. "Sit down, sir. Another word out of you and I'll have the bailiff escort you to a cell for perjury." Commander Vance stepped forward again, clicking his pen with a sound that felt as final as a prison door locking. Your Honor, in light of the commander's active duty status and the evidence of financial elder abuse and fraud, the Navy has filed a federal motion to freeze all joint accounts associated with the estate until a full forensic audit can be completed. Tiffany let out a small, strangled yelp. She looked at my father, her eyes wide with a realization that the sugar daddy she'd signed up for was about to be broke. The luxury lifestyle she'd been flaunting on her social media, the trips to St. Bart's, the shopping halls at Tyson's Corner, it was all built on my mother's stolen legacy. And now, the faucet was being turned off. My father reached out to grab her hand, but she pulled away, looking at him as if he were a complete stranger. I turned my head just enough to see the gallery. Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who had been so quick to judge me, looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. All those months of gossiping over the fence in Eastport, talking about how Scarlett abandoned the family, were coming back to haunt her. I could see the other neighbors shifting in their seats, avoiding my gaze. They had all fallen for my father's grieving husband act because it was more entertaining than the truth. They liked the drama of a failed daughter. But now, seeing the Silver Star citation sitting on the table and a JAG officer standing guard over my interests, they realized they were the ones who had been played. I didn't feel smug. I just felt a cold, deep exhaustion. These people weren't my friends. They were just spectators to a tragedy they didn't understand. The judge leaned back, his eyes fixed on my father. The motion to sell the Eastport property is denied. Effective immediately, I am appointing Scarlett Miller as the sole executor of her mother's estate. Furthermore, I am ordering Mr. Miller to vacate the premises within 48 hours. My father's face went a ghostly shade of white. 48 hours? But, Your Honor, all my things are there. Tiffany, and I just redecorated. The judge didn't even look up from his notes. You're lucky it's 48 hours and not 48 minutes, Mr. Miller. I am also referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges regarding the misappropriation of funds. I felt a weight lift off my chest, but the air still felt thin. The house was safe, but the man who had helped build it was officially gone. The second the judge stood up to leave, the silence in the room broke into a million jagged pieces. Tiffany didn't even wait for my father to get out of his chair. She grabbed her Michael Kors bag and started heading for the side exit, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the linoleum. My father lunged for her arm, nearly tripping over his own briefcase. Tiffany, baby, wait. It's just a misunderstanding. I'll call my accountant. We can fix this. She spun around, and the look she gave him was cold enough to freeze the Chesapeake in mid-July. Fix what, Howard? You're broke. You told me that house was yours. She didn't look like a new wife anymore. She looked like a business partner who just realized the company was bankrupt. She didn't spare me a glance, but the way she scrambled out that door told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't there for him. She was there for the ghost of my mother's money. The neighbors started to file out, but it wasn't the usual post-court chatter. It was quiet, awkward, and hurried. Mrs. Gable tried to catch my eye as she shuffled past, probably looking to offer some fake, I knew it all along apology, but I looked right through her. I didn't need her casseroles or her approval. Commander Vance clicked his briefcase shut and stood by my side, a silent wall of white fabric and military discipline. My father was left standing in the middle of the aisle, looking at the empty space where Tiffany had been. He looked older than 70 all of a sudden. The expensive blazer looked like it was wearing him. He looked at me, his eyes searching for that weak daughter he thought he could bully. Scarlett, you can't really let them throw me out. I'm your father. I stood my ground, my hands shoved deep into my pockets. You weren't a father when you were buying Tiffany a diamond tennis bracelet with Mom's life insurance money, Howard. You were a thief. I used his first name, and I saw him flinch as if I'd thrown a punch. You have 48 hours to get your things out of the Eastport house. And I mean your things. If I find one piece of Mom's jewelry, or one of her paintings missing, Commander Vance won't be the only one you're dealing with. I thought about the house, the porch where Mom used to sit and watch the sailboats, the kitchen that always smelled like Old Bay and lemon. He had turned it into a showroom for a life he didn't earn. Now it was going to be a sanctuary again. We walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, blinding glare of the Annapolis sun. The humidity was soaring, and you could hear the cicadas screaming in the trees around the State House. My father was right behind us, still trying to plead his case, looking frantic as he realized his silver Mercedes, the one he'd bought with the debt money, was likely on the list of frozen assets. Just as we reached the sidewalk, a black government sedan pulled up to the curb. My driver stepped out, snapped a crisp salute to me, and held the door open. My father stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at the car, then at the salute, then at the two-star general's flag on the small fender mount. The neighbors who were lingering by their cars stopped to stare. This wasn't a drifter getting into a beat-up Jeep. This was a commander returning to her post. Driving back to the house in Eastport felt like navigating through a fog. The black sedan glided past the familiar sights, the Maritime Museum, the rows of sailboats docked at the marinas, but it all looked different now. When we pulled up to the driveway, I saw the house. It was a beautiful, shingled Victorian, but Tiffany, had already started stripping away its soul. There were modern, tacky lawn ornaments where Mom's hydrangeas used to be, and a live, laugh, love sign hanging on the porch that made my stomach turn. I stepped out of the car, the salt air hitting my face, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to leave again. My father arrived 10 minutes later in his Mercedes, looking like a man heading to his own execution. He didn't even have his keys. I was already standing on the porch, waiting for him. The next few hours were a blur of cardboard boxes and heavy silence. I watched my father wander through the rooms, picking up items and putting them down as if he didn't recognize them. He went to the master bedroom, trying to pack his expensive silk ties and his collection of Tag Heuer watches. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed. Just the clothes, Howard. Anything that was bought with Mom's money stays here until the audit is done. He looked at me, a flash of the old anger in his eyes. This is ridiculous, Scarlett. I worked for this family, too. I didn't even blink. You worked for yourself. You let her sit in that room alone while you were at the chart house with a girl younger than your own daughter. Pack the bags and go. He looked deflated, a shell of the man who had called me a disgrace just hours ago. While he was fumbling with his suitcases, I walked into Mom's small office. It was the only room he hadn't touched, probably because it didn't have anything shiny enough for Tiffany to care about. I sat at her old roll-top desk, the one that always smelled like lavender and stationery. I ran my fingers over the wood and felt a loose panel near the back. My mother was a woman of secrets, a habit she'd passed down to me. I pried it open and found a small, weathered leather journal and a flash drive. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened the journal to the last page, dated just a week before she died. Her handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. Scarlett, I know what he's doing. Don't let him win. The proof is on the drive. She knew. She had been fighting him from her bed while I was thousands of miles away. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop, my breath hitching. It wasn't just bank statements. It was a series of recorded conversations. My mother had used her old baby monitor system to record my father in the next room. I hit play. I heard his voice, clear and cold, talking to Tiffany while my mother was literally gasping for air in the other room. Don't worry, babe, he had said. The doctor says it won't be much longer. Once the house sells, we're hitting the Mediterranean. Scarlett's too stupid to notice the money's gone. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the edge of the desk. He hadn't just moved on. He'd been rooting for her to die. I looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, holding a suitcase. He saw the laptop screen. He saw my face, and for the first time, I saw real, unadulterated fear in his eyes. The room felt like it was shrinking. My father stood there, clutching the handle of his expensive Rimowa suitcase, his knuckles white. The audio from the laptop was still looping, that chilling, casual tone he used when discussing my mother's timeline. It was the sound of a man who had already buried his wife in his mind months before her heart actually stopped. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just looked at him, and I think that's what terrified him the most. I had seen men break under pressure in high seas operations, but this was different. This was a man realizing that his daughter wasn't just a drifter he could patronize anymore. She was the one holding the evidence that could put him behind bars for the rest of his life. Scarlett, he whispered, his voice cracking like dry parchment. You have to understand. It was a dark time. I was lonely. I didn't mean it like that. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. I picked up my phone and made one call. It wasn't to a friend. It was to the Annapolis Police Department. 10 minutes later, the quiet, tree-lined street of Eastport was lit up with the rhythmic flash of red and blue lights. The neighbors, the same ones who had been whispering about my disgraceful life, were out on their porches again, peering through their hedges. 2 officers walked up the steps, their heavy boots thudding on the porch I had spent my childhood playing on. "Commander Miller?" one of them asked, giving me a respectful nod. I handed them the flash drive and the ledger I'd pulled from the desk. "I'd like to file a formal complaint for financial elder abuse, fraud, and reckless endangerment."
My father started to back away toward the kitchen, his face a mask of pure panic. "Wait, you can't do this. This is my house," my father screamed as the officers moved in. He looked pathetic, trying to dodge them by ducking behind the kitchen island, the island where my mom used to make us pancakes on Sunday mornings. Tiffany was nowhere to be found. She'd probably already blocked his number and changed her locks. The officers didn't hesitate. They pinned his arms behind his back and clicked the handcuffs into place. The sound of that metal ratcheting shut was the most satisfying thing I'd heard in years. "Howard Miller, you're under arrest," the officer intoned, reciting the rights my father had so casually ignored for everyone else. He looked at me as they led him toward the door, tears finally streaming down his face. "Scarlett, please, don't let them do this." I just stood there, my arms crossed, watching the man who called me a disgrace being hauled away in front of the whole neighborhood. Once the police cruisers pulled away and the sirens faded into the distance, the house went incredibly still. Lieutenant Commander Vance was still standing by the door, a silent sentinel in his white uniform. "Do you need anything else, Commander?" he asked softly. I shook my head, staring at the empty space where my father had stood. The Live, Laugh, Love sign was still on the porch, a mocking reminder of the fake life he'd tried to build here. I walked over, ripped it off the hook, and tossed it into the trash can by the driveway. The house felt lighter, as if it were finally breathing again, after being choked for months. I walked back inside and sat on the floor of my mother's office, leaning my head against the cool wood of her desk. The battle was over, but the silence was the heaviest thing of all. The first thing I did the next morning was call a junk removal service. I didn't want a single memory of Tiffany or my father's midlife crisis left in that house. I watched from the porch as they hauled out that sleek, modern Italian sofa they'd bought to replace Mom's favorite armchair. Out went the espresso machine that cost more than a month's rent, and out went the crates of expensive wine my father had been charging to my mother's estate. The neighbors watched from across the street, huddled near their mailboxes, but I didn't care anymore. I was wearing an old navy sweatshirt and a pair of beat-up jeans, my hair tied back with a rubber band. I looked exactly like the disgrace my father had mocked. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. The house was beginning to smell like lemon oil and salt air again, the way a home in Eastport should. By noon, the house was mostly empty of the new stuff. I went back to my mother's office, determined to go through every single drawer. I knew there was more. My mother was a meticulous record keeper. She'd spent 20 years working as a bookkeeper for the local marinas, and she didn't miss a cent. Underneath a false bottom in her file cabinet, I found a second ledger. This one wasn't about the medical bills. It was a record of the consulting fees my father had been taking from her family's trust for a decade. He hadn't just started stealing when she got sick. He'd been slowly bleeding her dry for years, thinking she was too distracted to notice. But she had seen it all. Every dinner at the Iron Rooster, every business trip to Vegas. She had logged it all, waiting for the right moment to protect me. As I sat on the floor with the ledger in my lap, my old phone, the one I only used for family, vibrated. It was a notification for a saved voicemail from a year ago that had somehow been backed up to the cloud. I hit play, my heart hammering. It was my mother's voice, sounding tired but clear. "Scarlett, honey, I know you're out there somewhere on the water. I'm so proud of you. Don't ever let your father tell you that you're less than what you are. You're a commander, Scarlett. You're a leader. And this house, it's your anchor. No matter what he says, you have the watch now." I broke down then, sobbing into my hands. She had known the storm was coming long before I did. She wasn't a victim. She was a strategist. And she had spent her final months making sure her daughter had the coordinates to find her way back home. There was a soft knock on the screen door. I wiped my eyes and walked to the porch. It was Mrs. Gable. She was holding a small bouquet of flowers from her garden.
Real hydrangeas. Not the plastic junk Tiffany had put out. She looked smaller than she had in the courtroom, less sure of herself. "Scarlett," she whispered, her voice trembling. I had no idea. Howard told us so many stories. He made it sound like he was all alone. I feel like a fool." I looked at her, and the anger I'd been carrying for the neighborhood just kind of dissipated. "People see what they want to see, Mrs. Gable," I said quietly. "But the next time a woman in this neighborhood is struggling, maybe ask her the truth instead of listening to the loudest man in the room." She just nodded, left the flowers on the railing, and walked away. A week later, I was back in Commander Vance's office, but this time we weren't in a stuffy local courtroom. We were at the Washington Navy Yard. Vance tossed a folder onto his desk with a grim smile. "The forensic audit is back, Scarlett. It's worse than we thought. It turns out my father hadn't just been skimming off the top. He had been funneling money through a shell company he'd set up in Tiffany's name to avoid taxes. Because I was on active duty and some of the funds he touched were military survivor benefits, he'd crossed a line into federal territory. He wasn't just facing a messy probate case anymore. He was looking at a multi-agency investigation." Vance looked at me, his expression softening. "The DA is offering him a plea deal. 10 years. But he has to sign over every remaining asset to you immediately. No more trials, no more drama. He just goes away." I decided to see him one last time before the transfer. I didn't go to gloat. I went to close the book. The visiting room at the county jail smelled like industrial bleach and despair. My father sat behind the plexiglass, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. The designer suit was gone, replaced by a bright orange jumpsuit that made his skin look sallow and gray. He picked up the phone, his hand shaking. "Scarlett, please," he started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not here to listen to you, Howard. I'm here to tell you that the house is back in Mom's name. The car is gone. The penthouse is gone. And Tiffany, she's already cooperating with the police to save her own skin." He closed his eyes, a single tear tracking through the wrinkles on his face. He'd traded a 30-year legacy for a girl who wouldn't even take his collect calls. "You called me a disgrace," I said, my voice echoing in the small booth. "You told the neighbors I couldn't cut it in the real world. But the truth is, you're the one who couldn't handle reality. You couldn't handle being a man when things got hard." He looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flash of the dad I used to have, the one who taught me how to tie a bowline knot on the docks when I was 6. But that man was long gone, buried under layers of greed and cowardice. "I'm signing the papers," he whispered. "Just don't hate me forever." I didn't answer him. I just hung up the phone and walked out. Hate takes energy, and I didn't have any left to waste on him. I had a house to fix and a memory to honor. I spent the next month restoring the house in Eastport. I repainted the porch the exact shade of Chesapeake blue my mother loved. I replanted the garden, getting my hands deep in the Maryland dirt until my fingernails were stained and my back ached. Every morning, I'd take my coffee out to the dock and watch the sun come up over the water. The neighbors started stopping by again, not to gossip, but to actually help. Old Mr. Henderson from across the street helped me fix the loose shingles, and even Mrs. Gable brought over some homemade jam. I wasn't just the girl who ran away anymore. I was Commander Miller, the woman who had come home to claim her anchor. I realized then that my mother was right. The house wasn't just a building. It was a witness to everything we had survived. On my last day of leave before heading back to the Pentagon, I sat at my mother's roll-top desk and wrote a letter to myself. I tucked it into the hidden compartment where she'd left her secrets. It was a reminder that people will always try to tell you who you are based on what they can see. They'll look at your clothes, your silence, or your scars and think they've got you figured out. But they don't see the storms you've weathered, or the strength it takes to keep your steady course when the world wants to pull you under. My father thought he could erase me, but he only succeeded in revealing exactly who I was. As I locked the front door and headed toward my truck, I looked back at the house one last time. It was standing tall, its lights glowing warm against the twilight. I wasn't a disgrace. I was a commander. And I was finally, truly, at peace. At the end of the day, family isn't always the people who share your blood. It's the people who share your values. Don't let anyone who hasn't walked a mile in your boots tell you what you're worth. Your rank, your character, And your truth will always outlast their lies. Stand tall, keep your eyes on the horizon, and remember, the loudest voice in the room is rarely the most powerful one. Take care of your legacy, and it will take care of you.